Jack, a 24-year-old from Denver, Colorado, has always loved nature. He had been camping with his father since he was a child, enjoying the sound of the wind in the trees. But this time he decided to go alone to a remote forest in Montana that his father had warned him about years ago. The forest was called the Silver Canyon. It was an area that few people dared to set foot in. Jack had heard many local stories about this forest. It was said that in the 1930s, a skilled hunter named Walter Grave was killed in this forest and his spirit still wanders there. But Jack did not believe in these legends. He wanted to have an adventure and spend a quiet and exciting night in nature. Jack arrived at the forest early in the morning with his heavy backpack. It was a narrow, old dirt road, covered with fallen autumn leaves. The fresh air and the smell of wet soil filled him with energy. After about 2 hours of walking, he reached a place where he decided to pitch his tent. It was near a river, and the trees around it separated him from the rest of the world like a high wall. As the sun began to set, Jack lit a fire and began to prepare dinner. But when night fell, the forest took on a different atmosphere. A strange silence hung in the air. No crickets, no wind, not even the sound of running water. This unnatural silence made Jack feel uneasy. It was 10 p.m. Jack was sitting by the fire, listening to music on his phone. But suddenly he heard the rustling of leaves behind him. He immediately took off his headphones and looked around. He saw nothing. It was a deer. It must have been a deer. With this sentence, he calmed himself and sat down again. But a few minutes later, the footsteps repeated themselves. This time closer. Jack shone his flashlight around, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. The next morning, Jack came out of his tent and noticed that the ground around his camp was in a mess. It was as if something or someone had walked through his camp. He saw footprints that didn't look normal, bigger than a normal human shoe and even stranger. Each shoe seemed to have 6 toes. He was a little worried but still consoled himself. This is another joke of nature. It's nothing. He decided to go to the river and fish. But when he got to the river, he felt that someone was watching him. Every time he turned back, he couldn't see anything, but the feeling never went away. That night, Jack prepared his camp more carefully. He gathered more wood for the fire so that the flames would stay lit until morning. At 11 p.m., while sitting by the fire, he saw a shadow in the trees. This time he was sure it was something. The shadow was taller, much taller than a normal human. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, but there was no answer. He ran to his tent and, his heart pounding, came out with the shotgun he had with him. But the shadow had disappeared. Jack decided to stay awake until morning. As he sat by the fire, he remembered a story his father had told him years ago. Walter Graves was a skilled hunter who was cursed by the locals for his reckless hunting and disrespect for nature. It is said that he was killed in a horrific way one stormy night and that his spirit now roams the forest, taking revenge on those who encroach on his territory. This thought worried Jack even more. He looked around and saw a shadow that quickly disappeared among the trees. In the middle of the night, a rustling sound and heavy blows that hit his tent startled Jack. He grabbed his gun and jumped out of the tent. He looked around, but there was no one. Only trees and a silence that was now more frightening than before. But when he turned around, he saw a mark on his tent. A strange mark was drawn in large scratches. Jack could not stay any longer. He gathered his things and started running into the darkness of the forest. But every time he thought he had gotten away from what was chasing him, he heard the same footsteps and the rustling of leaves again. He barely reached the road, and when he reached his car, he quickly left the forest. When he returned to the city, he told everything to his friends, but no one believed him. A few weeks later, Jack went to a store near the forest. The store owner was an old man who, hearing the name of the forest, said, "My son, you were very lucky to come back alive. This forest is Walter's territory. It always has been." From that day on, Jack never set foot in the forest. But every night, when he closed his eyes, heavy footsteps chasing him in the darkness echoed in his ears.